All right, thank you so much, Nate. We're really excited to talk about this as well. This has been very near and dear to our hearts over the last, I guess, 3 years, participating together as a cooperative interprofessional learning situation. And I am really excited and glad you guys were able to let us speak today. So I've already had the introduction, so I'm going to let our other presenters speak in order that's on the slide. So Elena, if you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Ray. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Elena Camacho. I have been a member of this program since its beginning in the fall of 2018. This fall will be our 3rd year. I am 32 years old and I have Asperger's syndrome, and I thank you so much for inviting us here to share with you our experience with this program.
Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray. My name is Patrick Chaney. I just turned 24 on Sunday. I have been involved with the LEAD program since launch back in 2018, much like Elena. And outside of the program, I am an ambassador for a nonprofit organization called Best Buddies. And through them, I have had speaking opportunities as an ambassador in multiple different states. And through their jobs program, I have 4 years of job experience with the Baltimore Ravens.
Thank you, Patrick. Leah, please.
Hi, my name is Leah Catherine Saal. I am an associate professor of literacy and adult education at Loyola University in Maryland here in Baltimore. And I've been a co-director of the LEAD program with my colleague, Lisa Schoebrodt, who will introduce herself in a minute, since the beginning. And we are so lucky to have an amazing partner in Ray. Her experience, her knowledge, her expertise, both from a teaching perspective as well as being on the commission that you'll hear more about. We really see this as an amazing interprofessional collaborative partnership. And we're so excited that you're interested and hope that you may be able to develop something similar in your location.
Thank you, Leah. You're making me blush. And Lisa.
Lisa, you're muted.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Schoebrodt. I'm a professor of speech language pathology in the Department of Speech Language Hearing Sciences at Loyola University, Maryland. And Leah has already said that I am her co-conspirator, so to speak, on these grants that we've had and with our business Leadability LLC. I will just say as well that we are very, very grateful and very blessed to be working with Ray, and with the partners that we've had with working with first responders have been outstanding. And I also want to say that we are also very, again, very blessed to be able to work with Elaina and Patrick as self-advocate educators, because their role is so extremely important in this work that we're doing that is very interprofessional and relevant for today.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this really could not happen without the interchange between everyone and their organizations that's on this webinar today. A little bit of background. First, let me let you know I did have some internet issues earlier, so if I pop off, one of my co-presenters will pop in until I can get the slides back up. But hopefully the winds seem to have died down and we should be okay to move on. So a little bit of background as to how this all came about. So it was due to an unfortunate incident back in January of 2013. This is Ethan Saylor. Ethan Saylor was a 26-year-old male with Down syndrome. He was at a local movie theater in one of our counties in Maryland, Frederick County. He had seen the movie, they were getting him and his aide were getting ready to leave to head home. Aide went to get the car, but Ethan decided that he didn't want to leave. He wanted to see the movie again. So security was called, and security happened to be off-duty sheriff's department members. And unfortunately, there was a scuffle. Ethan was suffocated and succumbed to his injuries. His mom, Patty Saylor, was so distraught, obviously, the loss of her son, but she also wanted to make sure that this did not happen to anyone else. So she wrote to the then governor of Maryland, Governor Martin O'Malley, and wrote a letter, and it must have been a very moving letter, because as a result, there was a commission formed to make sure that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are recognized, and that this doesn't happen, that there's training. Now, as most things happen with law enforcement and public service, so it was initiated as a law enforcement issue. But as we know, whenever something happens with law enforcement, fire and EMS are usually lumped into the public service as well. And that's how I got involved in the committee. I worked for the state agency for Maryland at the time, and I was one of the commission members on behalf of our director. So the Governor's Commission for the Effective Community Inclusion of Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, it's a long title, began on September 17th of 2013. So the same year that Ethan succumbed to his injuries, the commission was formed. So the commission had went for quite a while, went until December of 2015. And there were listening tours, and for the most part, EMS did fairly well, because we go to incidents with a different mindset. We go to incidents feeling that we're there to help someone, not to de-escalate. So overall, we did well. However, communication was something that fell short. Sometimes we would talk to the aide and not directly to the individual with the IDD or the individual or the patient. So communication was sometimes an issue. So the mainstay that came out of the listening tours and the talk between all the committee members, which involved individuals from law enforcement, the Department of Disabilities, SelfAdvocates, were that individuals wanted to feel safe, understood, and valued. And the very best way to make an individual feel safe, understood, and valued is to make them part of the training. So we piloted some training with law enforcement through the commission. And then the first EMS training, I believe it was the first EMS training, Lisa and Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, was through Montgomery County. Yeah, so we were the first that actually did the training with EMS, and some other jurisdictions have jumped on as well in Maryland. And we're working now to, and I'll get to this a little bit later, but a statewide initiative for training. So that's where the Ethan Saylor Alliance was formed and went into law in April of 2015. And that's where Patrick and Elaina were brought into the mix. Lisa and Lee were already involved. I was already involved. And now we have the SelfAdvocates as part of the training and information. So here's where we started. We had to create some EMS scenarios, because the scenarios that were already created were mainly for law enforcement. Then we had to train SelfAdvocates to be the educators, and that's where Patrick and Leah fall into. Then we were invited, we used this through our continuing education sessions. So we first did this before COVID, where Lisa, Leah, and our SelfAdvocates came to our training facility during one of our continuing education sessions. We offer them about once a month to about 25 to 30 individuals. And so our first half was basically a little bit of lecture of here's things to look for if you have a patient with IDD, some common difficulties they may have with cognitive and understanding the questions, and tips and tricks on how to, interact with individuals with IDD. Or should they be your patient, or we're moved on to, should they be the person calling for your patient? They may be the only individual on the scene that you can interact with. The patient themselves may be unresponsive or unable to respond to you. So then the second half was we ran through a scenario where our EMS providers went and acted through a scenario with one of our SelfAdvocates. And then during the scenario, the team would interact, other participants would critique, and then we would go over the best practices, kind of re-emphasize the information that we provided in the beginning of the session and emphasize through the scenario. And here's where we are now. COVID hit. So we were lucky enough when COVID hit to be able to continue this through a video platform. We used Microsoft Teams at first, and then we moved to Zoom. The platform itself really doesn't matter because I believe you're able to do this with any of the video conferencing platforms. We started with like we did before, we started with the first half an hour being a little bit of lecture, and the second half being the self-advocates acting the scenario via Zoom. So they would be the only ones on camera. The stomach ache is one that was commonly used. So they'd act out having the stomach pain, calling 911, talking to the 911 dispatcher, and then we had everyone, but we had the two individuals that were going to be our EMS team in the breakout room. And my connection is saying it's unstable, so I apologize if I'm cutting in and out a little bit. So they would be outside, and then we would let them back into the room to run the scenario. And then folks for critique, the EMS providers will say what they felt went right, what they could improve on. The folks observing would do the same thing. And then we'd have our self-advocators say, well, here's how the interaction was for us. And this is really the main key is why we're doing what we're doing, is so that the self-advocate can let us know as EMS providers, what went wrong, what went right, what we can improve on, or if we did a fantastic job, if we communicate it well, if we, there's with any scenario type thing, it's always tough. And you know this with your students, is as you're going through this, to have them to don't talk to the instructor, talk to the patient. And that's it's easier in real life because that's the patient is who you're supposed to talk to. But as we know, sometimes you got to edge especially if they're new in the program, edge them into interact with your patient. So that's where we continued until this year. And this year, we're moving to an asynchronous platform along with a synchronous platform. So we're lucky enough to get a grant. Lisa and Leah were able to find a grant for us that we created basically an online portion that the participants watch prior to showing up to the Con Ed session. And then they would then come to the Con Ed session, which just allowed us to be even better interacting than we had previously. So we're utilizing breakout rooms where we have multiple self-advocates. So we have smaller group of individuals participating, which means more folks can be actively involved rather than a whole room full of folks. And we were able to run multiple scenarios, so we can do it more than once and kind of really emphasize those points that we're looking to emphasize. So the COVID kind of helped us be able to move into a little better way to provide this. The asynchronous portion, we have not run that yet. The asynchronous portion was our first session with the multiple self-advocates and multiple scenarios was this month, earlier in April. The asynchronous portion was not ready yet, but that should be ready for our May presentation. So we'll have a little more information once that happens on how that ran. So that's where we started. This is where we are. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and Leah to kind of tell us about the outcomes. There's a couple questions. I think most of them is formal education. So once this platform is on our, we hope to have this on our state's online training center. And once the asynchronous portion is on the state's online training center, other folks can log in. You just have to ask for a login for it. And moving forward, as we're still in the pilot phase, so moving forward, we definitely want to look at making this outside of Maryland. So we started countywide, now we're moving statewide, and hopefully we can do this nationally as well. And through NAEMSE, we can keep in touch, and I'll let you know how we're going and if we're ready to kind of evolve into that further, Jonathan, and anyone else who is interested.
Well,
hey, Lisa, Lee, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. We're so excited that you guys are interested in the model. One of the things that is amazing because of one of the good things that came out of COVID, as Ray mentioned, is this ability to really expand the model out in ways that both benefit our providers like you guys, but also really relieve the need for transportation for the self-advocate educators and for Lisa and myself. So that idea that we can open up sharing the knowledge that we've gained is just a really exciting thing. So
Yeah.
what have we learned? Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that whole ability for people with IDDs thing. I live up in Baltimore County, which is barely even a mile away from the state line with Pennsylvania. So in Le Mans terms, it basically means every Best Buddies event I go to is a good hour's drive to and from. So having this option of accessibility really does take the strain off of being there, like of having to take time out of my day to be there.
Absolutely. Awesome, Patrick.
Thank you.
And Leah, if I can jump in real quick too, one of the things that came out of the commission with the Ethan Saylor Alliance was we wanted to make sure that our individuals with our self-advocates were also compensated for what they do. They're usually underpaid for the work that they do, and we didn't want them to have to continue to volunteer. So one of the things that helped us to be able to continue this was that there's no travel time, there's no travel expense. And being able to do this via the remote platforms such as Zoom, our individuals can do that when it's convenient for them, and there's not a cost associated with them doing that.
Absolutely. So I probably should explain a little bit about what the LEAD model is before maybe we talk about the outcomes. And LEAD is essentially the interprofessional perspective that we talked about kind of from the beginning. The idea that emergency response providers and trainers, academics like myself and Lisa, and the self-advocate educators come together to create curriculum that is not only content rich and supportive of expanding out providers' understanding about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and the traits that they have, both in non-emergency situations, but certainly how their disability might impact their ability to communicate in emergency situations. So the idea that all of us are coming together with our individual expertise, communication, learning, EMS, patient care, lived experiences, that all of those things are coming together to hopefully provide really rich and meaningful training that's not only hitting all of the standards that we're trying to hit, both from a national and a state perspective, but that it's providing authentic opportunities to practice what we've learned in real time. So instead of just hearing about how to work with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or maybe even hearing from people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the LEAD model takes it a step further to provide these scenario-based training experiences so that everyone gets an opportunity to practice what they learn. We know from adult education research that adults are very reticent to try something new in a high-risk situation if they've never had the opportunity to try it in a low-risk situation. And so what the LEAD model does is it provides that low-risk opportunity for people to learn and get feedback from their peers, from the people that they serve, and from experts in learning and communication to really increase everyone's comfort in being able to employ those skills in practice. We certainly have taken a lot of data, as Ray and everyone has mentioned. We have applied for a number of grants and are certainly also researchers. So we believe in this model, but we want to show that it works, right? So that we can continue to maintain funding and hopefully expand to places like Texas and beyond. So what we have done is collected both quantitative and qualitative data. So we have some metrics that we keep. What we found is that the trainees or the providers, both those who are training to become EMS providers and those who already are, so we've done both kinds of training, that they are reporting statistically higher levels of comfort in social interactions with people with disability post-training compared to how they reported those pre-training. And they also reported lots of qualitative positive experiences in the model. So one participant said, I enjoyed it very much. The role playing and discussion helped me get a better understanding. Having Elena's input also helped in what she saw or thought we needed or could do better. And another participant says, my slides advanced. That it was excellent. Having the patient actually there with an IDD made all the difference in the world. Chris, another one of our self-advocate educators, is an amazing actor. Please tell him to come back. So those are just kind of two examples of things that we hear over and over again from the providers that we interface with. And we are pleased about all the positive outcomes that we have seen so far.
Thank you, Leah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So we have learned a lot of lessons throughout what we've done between both grants, both being synchronous and asynchronous. As we said, with the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, in-person trainings moved online with positive outcomes. So we've had some very good outcomes with that. And as everybody has also said, the online trainings allow for sessions to take place at times of the day that work for all participants. And transportation is no longer a barrier to get anybody to any of the sessions in terms of being in person or otherwise. I know one of the things that the commission is still trying to do is to build a base of self-advocate educators in various regions of the state so that people could be able to go out to provide in-person training if that's really what is needed. It may be, we know from also working with Howard County EMS that we've been working with their new trainees, so not continuing education, but their new trainees, and that the preferred way in that case is often to be in person, which is fine. I mean, that's either way. We've been able to roll either way that we've been able to do. We've been very flexible and be able to and feel very confident in the information and the that we're getting back in terms of that the scenarios still are able to be conducted in a way, and with the questions, we have questions thereafter that are asked that's still meaningful, whether it's online or in person. The thing that I think we do lose by not being in person is just the types of things that we ask the question, perhaps, what would you do with your body language or things like that, to be able to, if you were on the scene. And so people are able to say pretty much, particularly if it's continuing education, because they've been on calls before like that, the kinds of things that they would do. And so that's why I think it's important sometimes with the in-person that you're able to actually see the patient and be able to interact that way. Our scenarios for online trainings must take into account the number of people in the scene. Too many people acting in the scene can compromise the interaction. So this again is one of the things that we found when we tried to move online with, and by the way, I can say that all of our scenes that we've been developing, we've developed 2 more since this time. I've been in cooperation with Ray, who's been our partner, and then Don in Howard County, in terms of the kinds of calls that you all respond to, so that we know that we're not just creating something out of the blue, because this is not our area. My area is speech pathology and Leah's area is literacy. So we really want to be sure that the kinds of things that we're creating are very realistic types of scenes that you would go out on, so that they're authentic. And so we train, and so when we're training our self-advocate educators, we talk about, what happens in these scenes and how to really be able to role play effectively in there. We want to be sure that they take, that they have a lot of emotion, for example. And to be honest, we try to train them so they're doing many things that are not what you would expect. So unexpected behavior, so that it really makes the interaction between the first responder and the person, our SAEs, to have to go on a little bit longer. So you really have to think and move through the scene. It's not something generally that takes just a few minutes. I think our scenes probably can run anywhere from about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on who's in the scene with them. We did find, for example, that one of the scenes that we had where we were trying to role play, and again, this was suggested by somebody that frequently they might be called to go out to transportation bus that is for people with disabilities, and that somebody might have an emergency, and then it might trigger other emergencies with other people on the bus. And so we tried to run that one online, and it was just too confusing, even when we were doing it with our self-advocate educators. And so we knew that that was a scene, if it was going to be something that we were doing online, that we actually taped and videotaped and made into a case study that's now part of that asynchronous curriculum that we have as well. So these are some of the lessons that we've learned, and I think that's it for that slide, Ray.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I started reading the chat. I was going to add something on. Oh, so yeah, our self-advocates or educators are really into this. And we have a myriad of individuals, just as any patient that you respond to is different. As one diabetic is completely different from another diabetic. The individual's IDD is completely different than another individual IDD. So we have individuals that are very like Patrick and Elaina, who are very articulate and able to keep very easy to communicate, to individuals that have some speech issues that we cannot necessarily communicate very well with them. We really have to listen to that individual. And as we're doing these, a lot of our folks are very high functioning individuals, and we have to actually train them to not be. The first thought for folks who may not work with individuals with disabilities is that, we don't really have to train up to have a disability. Well, some of these we do, because they've never had, say, a stomach ache or a broken leg or whatever the scenario will be. So we actually were training them as we would train any other actor or a standardized patient. And which reminded me, I didn't get to our polls. So we'll do that at the end. We'll talk about our polls a little bit. So that brings us to our first self-advocate that's going to talk with us today, and that's Elaina.
Well, hello again, everyone. As I said earlier, my name is Elena Camacho. I'm 32 years old. I have Asperger's syndrome. Like Patrick, I am also involved in Best Buddies in Maryland, particularly as a jobs and a states ambassador. And also outside of that, I am also a Special Olympics Maryland athlete. I first got involved back in 2018 when the program first launched. And it was also coincided of when I became Special Olympics Maryland law enforcement torch run ambassador. And I thought that this would be a great opportunity to further expand my interactions with law enforcement. I'm happy to say all have been positive. The particular scenarios EMS scenarios I've done, as Lisa mentioned, I was part of the case study where we were on a transit bus, and I was the one who had to alert the bus driver that we had to pull over, that there were two other actors in the scenes who were experiencing a medical emergency. But the particular scenario I participated online is being home alone and then experiencing like a very onset stomach ache. For my particular one, I was they could see that I was mimicking the symptoms of, I would be having appendicitis or food poisoning. So I would first call parents and no answer. And then I would call 911, and then Leah would be the dispatchers. And then they would ask, are you home alone? And I would say yes. And I would say, do we have access? Well, the paramedics have access. And I would say the front door is open. And then the paramedics would arrive. They would ask questions and they would explain like what they were going to do. Like, can we take your vitals? Do you have any medications? Is there a certain hospital you would like to go to? And then also they would ask, is there anything you need us to do before we take you in the ambulance and go to the hospital, such as, do you have pets that need to be taken care of? Is there a neighbor who can come watch them? Do we need to lock the doors and turn off the lights? And then I would be loaded into the ambulance, and then the scene would end. So why I think it's important for EMS, for these scenario-based trainings for EMS and EMTs, is because it'll give them an idea of what you expect when you're in the field. And, you know, from the scenario point, I can see that if we are familiar with the term "nothing about us without us," and a lot of the EMS and EMTs have found it helpful that they have had advocates such as myself, Patrick, and Chris come on, so then they can have an idea of how to interact with people with an intellectual or developmental disability from a variety. From me, Patrick, and Chris, we all have varying levels of IDD and DD and communication abilities. And the impact I hope that these trainings will have is, I would like to see them become a mandatory part of an EMS's training from when they're doing their academic and field-based scenarios, because the EMS and EMTs, they always will provide the first information when they're en route from picking up the patient and then taking them to the hospital. So then that way they can relay that critical information to the physicians and the nurses. So that way they can best help the patient. And also for the safety is paramount, just for both the person with the ID or developmental disability and our first responders as well.
Thank you, Elena. Now we get to hear from Patrick.
Thank you, Ray. Hello, everybody. For the people who came in late or who missed my introduction earlier, my name is Patrick Chaney. I just turned 24 on Sunday. I have high functioning autism. And as Elena mentioned earlier, I am an ambassador for Best Buddies. I'm with the Jobs and Ambassador program. Through the Ambassador program, I have multiple different experiences with public speaking, which is partially how I got involved with the program to begin with. Through their Jobs program, I have 4 years of experience with the Baltimore Ravens, and it's about as much about that story as I need to say. So I first got involved with the program at launch, much like Elena, because I thought it would be a good opportunity to sort of be a mentor of sorts to other SAEs who would be a part of the program, because I actually have a background with theater and performing arts, which is why I thought my particular skill set would be useful here, because that's what it was all about, the role play scenarios. But I myself, for the EMS anyway, have been involved with the scenarios involving being home alone during a medical emergency, though I did take the creative liberty to convert that into a toothache because that had convenienced me. I actually was going through a toothache during one of these trainings, so I just decided to play along with it. That was not a great week for me, but it was a very good way of making the best of a bad situation. So I think that participating in this scenario-based role play training is important for the EMS and EMTs because it is, as mentioned earlier, it was a non-consequential environment in which first responders are able to go through their protocols or their procedures in an environment in which the standards may not always be the standards. It's a great way to really stretch the skills that are needed for a first responder. Stuff like patience, understanding, stuff that you may need in a crisis situation or an emergency situation, rather. I would love for this to remain a part of a standard curriculum, because not only is it a great way for first responders, EMS, EMTs, to interact directly with people with disabilities. For example, our previous comments on Elena and Chris, but it's a great way for people with IDDs to also learn important social skills that they can use going forward in the future. If I could be transparent for a moment here, I think it's safe to say that we have all been in a situation in our lives where we have had to be dishonest about how we feel. We've had to grin and bear it. We've had to we've had to wear a brave smile when in reality we have been quaking in our boots, at least at some point in our lives. And being able to control your emotions is a skill that people with ID or DDs may not always have, but this is a great method by which they can learn those skills because it will help them in the future. The same way with EMS and EMTs, as a matter of fact, but I assume they won't have as much difficulty because they will be in situations where this is nervous. Like, people will be nervous in relatively unfamiliar situations, and it's a great way to control emotions in a controlled environment or a non-consequential environment, as I mentioned earlier. I think that that's the sort of thing that makes this program so captivating, so worth the time and effort that goes into it. And it's why I continue to support the program.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm answering one of the questions in there. While we're doing that, now that we've spoken for a little over half an hour, our perspective on self-advocates as standardized patients. Let's run through the polls here and see where everyone else has been or have done anything similar. All right, so it looks like it's close to 55% say yes. I'll end polling, and I always have share results. Hopefully y'all can see the results now. It looks like about 55% of the people have used standardized patients, and about 45% have, so pretty close. So let's move to our next poll, which helps us answer a little more detail. So it's going to be a little skewed because I think it only allowed one answer. Sorry about that, folks. So professional actors. So the university where I used to work at, they would hire professional actors. Also, I've utilized students from the theater program at my institution as well. Using our instructors is usually, and the coach peers. Usually it's the other students that are simulating the scenario and coaching each other. I have a couple of folks put in individuals having the simulated diagnosis. So can anyone share either in the chat what it is that you utilized? Like, what type of diagnosis? Was it someone you knew that had like a high blood pressure or something along those lines? Oh, glass eyes, fake vomit. Gotcha. One guy, oh, okay. You always throw, oh, a pregnant person. Perfect. Yeah, that's always throws someone off. Is it, if they can't, let's love it when they, you run them through a scenario and say, oh yeah, breast sound equal bilaterally. And the person, the person does not have any. So that really throws things for a loop. And this kind of is redundant from the last one. If you use self-advocates. So self-advocates being someone like individual such as Elena, or Patrick, who actually have the diagnosis. Oh, I like that, Tom. You actually used a person who had to kind of reenact their EMS experience. That's awesome. Again, that's how more of a self-advocate is someone who actually not only has a diagnosis, but has actually lived the experience. And Tom has kind of answered our next question. And if so, what type of patient that was in there? So he's already put that in the chat area for us. Are there any other questions, comments, anything you'd like to share with us that can kind of help our program become better? I know you didn't get the whole program, so you kind of got the nuts and bolts. And I hope we answered all your questions in the Q&A area. I believe we have. If not, please pop something in there or in the chat area.
I was actually thinking, you did a great job so far of answering the questions in the Q&A as we went, but I wonder if it may be valuable to talk about a couple of the questions that came in just over the stream so everyone gets a chance to hear about them. Particularly, I'm looking at this one, at what time in a non-life-threatening situation, when you have a patient with IDD, do you actually talk with the caretaker instead of the individual? I don't know if you have any comments about that, or maybe, I know obviously it changes a lot based on the specific scene you're talking about, but if you have any comments about maybe some ways to approach a scenario like that.
Yeah, so Patrick, there's an area where if you click on the open and the answered, some of those questions were answered, but I'd love to hear your perspective of that. When, at what point in time do you believe it's best for the EMS provider to refer to the bystanders, basically the other people in the scene, as opposed to the patient?
Okay. This is in the Q&A section, right?
Yes.
Are there any local organizations that I might be able to utilize until your program is nationwide?
So Patrick, I was actually referring to the question you were asking about when is it a good time to interact with the patient as opposed to someone else?
Oh, well, usually you would want to be patient first about the approach, but sorry, that's my dog. But
okay.
if a person who serves as some sort of support to the person with a disability who is currently in a medical emergency, then they should be allowed at least any assistance that they are capable of giving. It's like if there's something, or sorry about that. It's just hard to focus with the dog. But right, if there is, I don't know, a parent, a guardian, someone who provides some form of support to the person who is potentially compromised by a medical emergency, then that would be a good time that would be a good person to help out in the situation, at least for purposes of controlling the situation. Like, most people with disabilities will have a technique that will help them control their nerves, their emotions in situations where they may feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar. This is commonly called stimming. It could be anything from tapping your feet to repeating what you say regularly, or having some sort of device like a fidget cube or a spinner to just to occupy your hands or your motor skills, something that can help you calm down. And if there is someone who knows any of these methods exclusive to the person with an IDD, then that would be where they would have a great impact. So if necessary, if there is somebody who is able to help, I would say that they would be most certainly, they would most certainly help the situation if for the sake of a person with IDDs.
Thank you, Patrick. I know a lot of folks have asked about where they can find this locally. You can reach out to me as an educator. What I've developed, I'm willing to share that, but also Lisa and Lee, this is what they're doing. They are trying to reach this out more broadly. So please email them for more information about how to get this closer to home. And this is one of the reasons why the state of Maryland was so involved in creating this education. Yet this started out as law enforcement. They wanted to expand it even out to bus drivers, the court system, anyone who would come into contact with an individual with an IDD and intellectual developmental disability. Sorry, I shortened that because it's a mouthful. So I probably should have said earlier, when I say IDD, it's the individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I know there's some questions that popped out on that about expanding it further and how you can, ways that you can utilize this training and have it available to you at your organization or closer to home. In the meantime, also what I did to get in touch with Lisa and Leah, because I had left the state and moved to a county job. And in that time frame, I just reached out to the Department of Disabilities for Maryland. And that's how I was able to connect with Lisa and Leah and the Ethan Saylor Alliance. So there probably are some training and information available locally to you. And I would say start with reaching out to your Department of Disability.
Awesome. And like you said, in order to get in touch with any of you, many of the emails have been sent in the chat, but I'll also include all of the contact information that you guys would like. I'll put that in the follow-up email along with the CEU information. So all of that information will be sent out directly to everybody in attendance today. So you can continue this conversation afterwards.
We also have, I just wanted to say, Elena mentioned in the chat that it talked about nonverbal people. We have a communication board that we've actually specifically designed for EMS that we're certainly willing to share with you all so that you can send that out, post as well.
Is that hosted online or is that like a document?
It's a document.
Oh, wonderful. I'd be happy to include that. I can send that out to everybody in attendance as well.
Great. I'll send it to you.
Absolutely. Definitely look out for that in your email, everybody. So we do have one more question that we might be able to address just in the last couple of minutes before we go ahead and take off from Paul in the Q&A.
So I think it may have been a question for Patrick, but
Oh, okay.
I probably can, well, it says Patrick, but I can probably jump in. One of the things with particularly a little guy that's a 2-year-old is to be really clear about your transitions. A lot of times stemming, as Patrick mentioned, happens when someone's trying to maintain their sense of calm, when there's a lot of extra stimulation happening. And that extra stimulation a lot of times happens during transition. So you're changing activities or maybe changing locations. One very good strategy for working with young children with disabilities is something called social stories. And I'm going to type it in the chat. Oh, whoop. And what social stories do is it really demystifies what is going to happen for them in the form of a narrative or a narrative story that puts them in the story. And so they're really powerful tools to use when working particularly with little guys with disabilities, because they help you to prepare that person or that child with a disability for what's about to happen. And a lot of, again, that extra sensory is still going to happen, but at least they're more prepared for it cognitively. Like I said, especially as you're trying to teach a new human how to interact in the world more broadly. Oh, yes. And on our website, we actually have a social story that we developed around COVID and things like social distancing, which of course is a very abstract concept. And abstract concepts are something that are very challenging for some people with ID and DD. So Hopefully that
Thank you
helps.
very much. Yeah, thank you for jumping in for that answer. I really appreciate it. It does look like we've done a great job so far of addressing everyone's questions as they've come in. If there's anything else that anyone has burning questions that you'd like to talk about more, like I said, I'll be including all of the contact information that you need and all of the links that have been shared in the chat. I'll include those in the follow-up email, so you can go there and you can access a lot of these resources. But I really appreciate all of you for being here and talking about this. This is a fantastic subject to talk about, and please stay in touch. If there's anything the NAEMSE can do to help spread, if you have programs going on and stuff like that, please let us know. And thank you very much to everyone in attendance. You've been great and very interactive. So thank you for being here and for helping us make this presentation go so well. If you guys have anything else you want to say before we go ahead and sign off.
No, thank you so much for having us. It's very near and dear to our heart. And we really do want to get the word out that this training can be available locally.
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing where this goes in the future. So thank you very much for being here and for sharing this with us.